Hello, Speak Up, Stand Up, Save a Life attendees. We are thrilled to be with you here today. My name is Anthony Williams. I'm with Patrick O'Neill. We are volunteers with Stepping Stones of Hope, a bereavement organization here in the Valley that helps communities and the families deal with the grief journey. Today, our session is going to focus on building resilience. Now, this is not inherently something we're born with, although as you'll see through the course of this interview, there are a lot of environmental factors and a lot of familial factors that can aid in developing that skill set, and it's effectively something that is learned like anything else. We have many skills that we take on, whether it's to become a master craftsman, a tile layer, a CPA, a physician, whatever it may be. We're going to practice those reps, and we are going to make a decision to have principles that we live by in our life, ultimately towards building resilience to have a successful life. And so I am thrilled to have Patrick with us today. He has a very unique story that happened to him many years ago. And I figure, Patrick, in full disclosure, we should probably let people know that we are, in fact, brothers-in-law. And that's how we came to know one another. And so I've had the great benefit of hearing and reading about Patrick's story. He shared at our teen grief camp called Reach, with Stepping Stones of Hope. And it was probably the highest rated thing that we did at camp that weekend. So it's an amazing story, and figure, let's use this as a jumping off point, if you don't mind, Patrick. What happened to you at age 15 years old? Walk us through that part of it.
15 years old, I was a freshman in high school. Running cross country, track, soccer, lived with my mom. She was a single mom raising me. My parents got divorced when I was very young. And my whole world got flipped upside down. My mom tragically died. And I was there. I was present. I had to go through that whole process when she passed away. She died in a don't know the best way to put it, but a very traumatic way. We were on a scuba diving trip down in Rocky Point, Mexico, getting our advanced dive certification, and we had to do a night dive. And at night, you had to charter a course off the coast. So we walked in off a boat ramp, and then you would go X amount of minutes out on a direct line following a compass and your air and a dive watch. And then we would rendezvous as a dive group, and then come back on that same line and end up back at the boat ramp. Halfway through the dive, we made it to our turnaround point. We started coming back. My mom had noticed that she was low on air. She tapped me, since we were dive partners, to notify me that something was up. I saw that she was kind of on the low side of air, but she wasn't dangerously low. I turned around to look for our dive group to let them know the situation. And because of the water clarity and everything else, they were gone. I turned back around to look for my mom. She was gone. Based off of our training, you're taught, go to the surface and wait for your partners up there. So that's what I did. I went there. I found her at the surface. She seemed to be having some issues with some of the equipment, the life vest called a buoyancy compensator. It fills up with air and it inflates so that you can float on the surface. For some reason, hers kept deflating, causing a little bit of anxiety and stress with her. I filled mine up, and immediately the first thing I thought was, well, I'll just pull you up on top of me, and I can see the strobe light at the boat ramp, so we'll just start kicking towards that flashing light. And that's what we did. So we did that. We were kicking our way back several hundred meters off from shore, and she was just talking away, talking about the dive and everything else that was going on. And all of a sudden, I was looking for dive group members, trying to see if anybody surfaced. I was kind of getting fatigued. I was swallowing a ton of salt water. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like I might drown out here with the weight of my mom pushing me under the water. I had some stress and anxiety. And all of a sudden, we're kicking. She's talking about the things we saw underwater, the octopus, the stingrays, and I couldn't see her face or see her front side because she was on top of me, but all of a sudden something changed. And in that moment, I felt that she had died. I didn't have to see her. I didn't know what happened. I just knew that she was no longer there. Her arms were limp, her legs were limp. I shook her, I yelled and cried out for her, and there was no response. And it was just something, maybe just a deep seated connection between a boy and his mom as a single parent. But I knew that something horribly happened, and in my gut, I just knew that she had died. So I called out to them. They came over. By now, we were really close to the shore. They didn't have to swim her very much farther to get her back on the beach. And I watched helplessly on that boat ramp while bystanders came up and draped towels around me. I was shivering. I was cold. It was March 29th, 1996. And I watched for 25, 30 minutes while people tried to do CPR on her, and with no luck. I held her hand, and I just, watched my mom just die, and nothing could be done. That was horrible. That was the worst thing that I possibly could have imagined happening in my life at that time. And it was life-changing, life-altering. My whole life got derailed from there. Everything that I had been planning to do changed in that one moment. And then after that, there was some issues with getting her body back into the United States.
So I wanted to interrupt that real quickly and ask, because obviously you've said you felt helpless, you felt horrible. I mean, your mother just died more or less in your arms. And now, I can't imagine being a 15-year-old boy and dealing with the fact that a girl hadn't called me back, right? This is so much more paramount. And now you're like, I've got to get my mom, a dead body, home to the United States. I'm dealing with just this thunderstorm of emotions. I don't want to presume to know what you were feeling. Would you mind just sharing, you felt horrible, you felt helpless, but now I've got to figure out how to get home with my mother who's dead. And then all the other, I just can't even imagine. Would you be able to shed some light on what you were feeling like at that moment and for maybe the next, I don't know, couple, 2-3 hours?
Yeah. So this is one of the most interesting things that I've been able to reflect back on and kind of learn from as I've delved into this as an adult and a parent myself. Immediately following her passing, one of the things that came to my mind was I was mentally searching for perspective. I was immediately asking questions. I'm like, why did this happen? How did this happen? What did I do to deserve this? And it was very traumatic, and for some reason, my mind went to a place where I needed perspective. And I'm still not sure why my mind thought the way it did, but I needed to know that things were going to be okay. I needed to tell myself, I'm going to be okay. And while my mind was racing and searching for something, I remembered a news article that I watched on middle school news TV a couple years earlier. And it was the African genocide tribe, African genocide between two tribes, and where one tribe just one day woke up and just with machetes, for some reason, decided to kill all the other people in their neighboring tribe and people that they lived in and amongst and everything else like that. And bear with me because it's kind of weird to think about this, but I remembered seeing an interview with this little girl. She must have been 8 or 9, and she hid inside of a room inside her house and looked through wood slats or something like that. I remember the details of the interview. And she watched her whole family get slaughtered with machetes. And somehow this girl was doing this interview, and there was a little bit of glimmer of hope on her face. I don't want to say she cracked a smile, but there was something that stood out to me where I was just like, wow, that's got to be the absolute worst thing for any human being to witness. But she's showing positivity. And immediately my mind said, okay, what I went through totally sucks. This is the worst thing I ever could have imagined happening to myself. But somebody out there has gone through something worse than I have, and they ended up okay. And I've carried that mindset ever since. I'm like, bad things are going to happen to you, bad things, but other people who have overcome greater obstacles. It doesn't take away from your obstacle that you're facing. But there's nothing wrong with drawing strength from other people's experiences and their stories to know that this sucks, what you're going through, it's bad, but things are going to be okay. Like, you're still alive. You still have breath in your lungs. You can still move your arms, your legs. You can talk to people. You can see the beauty in this world. And as long as you have that, things are going to be okay. And, you know, I'm a little bit of a spiritual guy. I was raised going to church and everything else like that. And without getting too into personal beliefs and stuff like that, I just had this belief that this wouldn't have happened to me unless, you know, what I believe in is God. I believe that God said, hey, I'm going to give you what you can handle. And in that mindset, I just said, okay, he thinks I can handle this. And then I have the perspective to know that other people have gotten over bigger things. I think I'm going to be okay. And I just started putting one foot in front of the other. And you were asking about getting my mom's body back to the United States. Fortunately, I didn't have to deal with a lot of that. I had to kind of witness it. But my dad, who lived in Nevada, that's where he came into play. The dive instructor, our dive group, they were working with the authorities. I had to just kind of witness the frustration that they went through. I didn't have to make any decisions. Other than I had to decide, yes, my mom, we're going to cremate her, and where are we going to put her ashes? And seemingly the most perfect place for her was to spread her ashes in the ocean. And that's what we did. So those were the decisions I had to make. And they were tough. It was, you don't want to make those decisions when you're 15.
So let's talk about your 15. And thankfully, you had a community. You had your father who was able to help out. You had your dive instructor who was able to help out. You had other people to handle and assist with some of the logistical stuff. I could be way off base, Patrick, but for a 15-year-old to be able to say, this really sucks, but I've had perspective that other people have overcome greater obstacles. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we're in the midst of this COVID pandemic. And I feel like we all need to frequently remind ourselves of Anne Frank and her family being in the little house. Like, let's have a little perspective on this type of stuff. And we've been affected directly by COVID, so I don't take that or say that insensitively or discompassionately. But I feel like that is such a mature and advanced way of thinking. Now let's just transition your story to now you're back in the United States of America. You're in high school, and you clearly have a perspective that I wish everybody had. I wish I had it more frequently as well. And you're in high school. Were you aware of the skill sets that you were building upon at that point?
No, I wasn't. At that time, I was just looking for regularity in my life. I wanted to ignore the fact that my mom just died. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want anybody to feel sorry for me. Like I looking back on it, even to this day, I hate when people, like, the idea of somebody feeling sorry for me because of what I went through. It makes my skin crawl. I don't want pity. I don't want sorrow. And one of the biggest things that I reverted to was just looking back as a parent now are the skill sets that my mom instilled in me. My mom was, she was raised by a single father. Her dad was raised by a single mother back in Iowa on a farm. And you want to talk about just generations of fortitude and strength and resiliency kind of compounding to my upbringing. I had a mom who worked 4 to 5 jobs just to make sure that we were able to do things we wanted to, that I could play soccer, that I had shoes for cross country and track, that we were able to go to California every year for our big vacation. And she made me get jobs early on in life where, I had to pick up trash in our neighborhood for $8.50 a big garbage bag, because she knew that I wasn't going to be able to afford a car, or she wasn't going to be able to afford a car for me when I turned 16. She's, at 8 years old, she's like, you better start saving for a car now. And I mean, just that work ethic that was kind of put in was, I mean, it's the hereditary component of, how to work hard and you just work hard to get through this. being in the middle of the track season, one of the first things I wanted to do is I just wanted to get back to running track. I wanted to be at track practice. I wanted to get that first practice out of the way where everybody was going to be looking at me and going, oh, is he okay? I mean, what do we say? How do we react to him? Do we hug him? Do we say anything? And, I felt more bad at the time, for all my track mates, because they didn't know how to act towards me, and everybody felt like they were on eggshells. And I just wanted to tell them, like, hey, can we just be normal? I know there's a big elephant in the room with this whole thing, but can you just treat me like you did before, and let's get on with track practice. Let's get on with our lives. And, and little did I know, but going to track and doing physical activity, was immensely helpful. I've done a lot of research and I've done a lot of studying, and I've met with counselors over the years, just to make sure I didn't leave any stones unturned in my grieving process of going through something so traumatic. And everybody's pointed to the fact of, being able to exert yourself physically at track practice. I was able to process a lot of emotions that way. And when I was angry, guess what? I put it on my legs, and I put it on my feet, and I put it on the track, and I ran as hard as I could. And I mean, there was a lot of times where we would go on these long runs for practice and on the canal banks. And, there's times where I'd be running by myself and I would just cry. There was times where I was angry and I ran it out, and I processed a lot of my emotions that way. So I went through the grieving process, albeit a lot by myself. I never saw formal counseling. I never went to a counseling group. I never went to a grief camp. I never had those tools. Had I had them, I think they obviously would have been significantly positive towards my life, and I wouldn't have had to process it on my own. But I look back and I'm proud of the fact that I was able to process it on my own with the tools that I didn't know I had, but they came out when I needed them.
Right. So let's move from high school to now you're an adult. And again, I feel humbled and blessed that, you decided, we had conversations before, and you're like, hey, I want to start writing. I want to start writing about my experience. You've written, I'll call it a manuscript. I mean, I'll call it your story, right? This particular, not your story, this particular story. And have had the opportunity to read that and chat through that with you. But as an adult, what was the catalyst, Patrick, for saying, I'm going to start reflecting on this. You've been on podcasts, internationally, you've been on podcasts across the pond. When did you really start to begin processing this as an adult? And what, if any, catalyst was there that said, you know what, I'm going to start diving into this?
Well, becoming a parent myself. I have two beautiful children. My daughter is 7, my son is 5. And going through what I went through. So I lost my mom when I was 15, and then 8 short years later, my dad died. He died of cancer. My mom's was a sudden death. My dad's we had a little bit of time to know that he was gonna die when he died. We had about 30 days from the time of his diagnosis to when he actually passed. So there were, 2 different experiences of loss that I had to go through, and both involving my parents. So by the age of 23, both my parents were gone. One of the biggest things that changed for me was when I became a parent. And in the back of my head, I just always have this mindset of like, you never know when your last day is. So you might as well enjoy the time that you have here, because you don't know when your clock's going to timestamp and you're done. Could be a car accident. You could get a disease. And, I carry a profound amount of, I like to consider, optimism. And I just try to, seize the day, enjoy it for what it is. Don't worry about the petty stuff. And being a parent, I wanted to try to start instilling some of the things that my mom taught me and what I learned growing up. And over the years, when I would share my story personally with people, because everybody would kind of ask, hey, I know your mom died when you were 15, but do you mind me asking, like, what happened? And when I get done telling them the story, their eyes are like giant saucers, and they're like, oh my gosh, like you need to write your story down and share it with somebody, because like it's incredible. and I always downplayed it. I never thought my story was worth anything. I never thought that it was, you know, something to be shared with openly with other people. However, with the mindset of knowing you don't know when your last day is, I wanted to have something that I could leave my kids. So I started just 15 to 30 minutes a night, sitting at a computer, typing out my story, as a gift to my kids that God forbid something happens to me. I work on the fire department, so I work in an inherently dangerous job. And I just wanted to have something. I'm like, well, something happens to me today. How will my kids know where I came from and know what I felt, who I am, what made me who I am? So I started writing it down, and it ended up becoming an incredible tool of therapy. Like, I started peeling off layers and looking at things that I never thought about, things that I never considered. I mean, when my mom died, I put my dad on such a high pedestal, and I worshiped the ground he walked on, and I thought he was absolutely amazing. As a parent myself, I reflect differently now, and I realized, as great as my dad was more of a friend to me than he was a parent. And it was easy to be drawn to him because we did all the cool stuff together, and he was my buddy, not my dad. When my mom died, he told me I needed to suck it up. She was gone, and that I needed to be a man and don't cry about it. He was an old cowboy type individual, and that was the way he was raised, and he put it on me, and that's what I did, but when I reflected back and started my writings, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm here today because of my mom. I'm here today because I watched her work endlessly and tirelessly for me, for us, for our 2-person family. The skill sets, the work ethic, the drive to do good in school, the anything less than an A is not okay. You need to be doing your best every single chance that you can. And when I realized that, it was like my whole world got kind of just opened up, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Like, I've been giving my dad too much credit, and I didn't give my mom enough. And so now I really want to try to focus in on that and just understand that as I go through these steps of being a parent myself, I'm doing right by my kids, the same things that my mom instilled in me. And it's just incredible what journaling can do. You write them down, and you can reflect back on them, and you can read them and go back and edit it. And I mean, it's like, it's crazy how much you can learn about yourself through that process.
I mean, look, you hit journaling, you hit exercise, you hit so many different things in there, which is great, because the weekend camps at Stepping Stones, as you know, Stepping Stones of Hope, we that's what we try to equip the kids and the families with, is all of those different types of things. But if you don't mind, I wanted to kind of summarize a little bit of what I heard as you were talking today. Obviously, the theme of today was building resilience. But I heard somebody who said I had to have perspective. I had to realize that other people, although my situation was serious and it was horrific, other people have dealt with things similar or worse and come out the other side of this. You didn't say these words, but I'm going to say them for you, is you chose to be a victor, not a victim. You did not allow the circumstances of your mother and then subsequently your father. And frankly, we didn't even get into some of the abusive nature of some of the women that your father, kind of hung around with, but we probably don't have time for that in today's, but more resilience. Audience, trust me on this one, more resilience that this man exhibited there.
The evil stepmoms of my life.
Yeah, the evil stepmom. Every Disney film, right? Every Disney film.
Yeah.
So, but so you build resilience. You have these core steps that you go through. You have perspective. You decide to be a victor, not a victim. And here you are on the other side of it. You're a captain with the fire department. You have a lovely family, 2 beautiful children. You're a contributing member to society. And I just think it's interesting and frankly, heroic that somebody could take this approach, because everyone's going to have, we'd say this at camp, and you know this, just because your dad died and my dad died or whatever, it doesn't mean our journey is going to be the same. We're all going to face different obstacles. We're all going to have a different upbringing. We're all going to have a different sense of community. But there are things we can control. we can control how we react to things.
Yep.
We can control what we do in our regular course of life. And to me, you are just an example of that. You made the decision to approach this tragedy productively and constructively to have a positive outcome and come out the other way. And there's mad respect for that. And I know I speak for all of the Speak Up, Stand Up, and Save a Life attendees that regretfully we couldn't be here live with you for this year's conference because of COVID, because I have every belief that if we were there live and we were sitting outside the session after the fact, I'd be sitting in the corner by myself, marveling over everybody lined up to talk with you. And that is a testament to you, my man.
Well, thank you.
Any closing, any words of wisdom before we wrap?
Yeah, just a couple quick things. One of the things that you just kind of hit on is, things in your life are going to happen and they're going to be outside of your control. And you can't help the car accident that took a loved one. You can't help the horrible cancer disease that came. You can't reverse time. They always say death and taxes are the two things that are inevitable in life, right? And how those things play out in your life, it's going to happen to you. And what it does is it comes down to, how do you respond? What is your choice? Are you going to be somebody that sulks and feels bad for yourself and wants the world to feel pity for you? Or are you going to honor that person that died and rise above and say, you know what? They're not here to live anymore, but I am here to live. So I'm going to live for them, and I'm going to live because of them, because of what they did for you in your life. When I was doing some counseling, I learned about resiliency. And when I finally was able to put a word to what I've been through, it was very, kind of inspiring to know, like, okay, I have a word that describes me, resilient, right? And it's a proud word because it means that you've overcome adversity and you're doing good, right? When I was doing the counseling, I learned that, 50% of resiliency comes from hereditary, 40% is teachable, and 10% is environmental. And when I look about my own personal journey, the 50% that I got from my mom, my upbringing, the genetic part of it, set me up for success. But I had 40% that I could teach myself, and that's 40% that everybody else out there has where they can teach themselves. I surround myself to this day reading books about people that have overcome things in their life. I love documentaries about, whether it's a guy that had to cut his own arm off because he was in a rappelling accident in Utah and then hike out 72 hours or whatever it was. I mean, learning about soldiers that have lost multiple limbs because of IEDs, hearing about the blind guy that, hiked to the top of Mount Everest. These are inspiring things that we all should draw from. And when you get the perspective of like, wow, people have overcome some pretty amazing things in life, hopefully you will find the perspective and to understand that what you're going through, as bad as it sucks, you need to process it. You need to let the emotions play out. You need to get counseling if needed, but find tools, find ways to make yourself resilient and be better and be the victor, not the victim.
Look, Patrick, I feel like that's a great way to end this thing. Thanks again for your time. Again, to the attendees of the Speak Up, Stand Up, Save a Life crowd, we wish you the best in your journey in building resilience.
Yes, thank you very much.